What World of Warcraft can learn from Final Fantasy XIV. Hello everybody, I am Jmulls of Jmulls Gaming, and I love MMORPGs, and my two favorites are World of Warcraft and Final Fantasy XIV. And I've been doing a bit of a mini-series on this channel lately, comparing and contrasting these two great games, and what each game can learn from each other, and it's time for the finale. We started with what Final Fantasy XIV can learn from World of Warcraft, and we talked about what World of Warcraft has learned from Final Fantasy XIV, but no game is perfect, and the road of self-improvement is a never-ending struggle and always an upward climb. And while I think World of Warcraft has massively improved rather quickly, there are still some things that I think it needs to hone in on and improve drastically. And I think taking inspiration from its competitive Final Fantasy XIV in these fields could do a lot of good. Now, as I've talked about before, I don't think you can simply lift a system one for one from another game and put it into World of Warcraft or vice versa and expect it to work. What I think needs to be done is analyze these systems and the ways that these games overcome certain obstacles, find out how they managed to do it within their own formula, and then try and think of a way to implement that idea to work in this game's formula. How can we take an idea from Final Fantasy XIV that works in the Final Fantasy XIV ecosystem, but make it work in the World of Warcraft ecosystem? And I think there are ways to do that. Even though, at the end of the day, these are different games with their own different goals and ideas, I don't think that should be used as an excuse to just hand-wave away subpar elements that could easily be better. I think the two things that stand out the most, for me at least, in terms of what I want WoW to learn from Final Fantasy XIV, in regards to, mainly stem from a storytelling experience. It's no real secret that for World of Warcraft, you play as insert champion here. You are a big player on the World of Warcraft stage, but when it comes to the actual storytelling, most of the time you're kind of relegated to, well, the back row, allowing the big named characters to take center stage in all the spotlight and to really further the events of the plot along. And you're really there to just grease the wheels and allow things to keep spinning and turning. You are important, don't get me wrong, but I think it's safe to say that when the game focuses in on all of these cutscenes, as it continues to double down on storytelling and in-game storytelling and pacing and cutscenes and all that, you don't really feel all that impactful, because you never speak, you never really interact in these cutscenes in a large way either. Again, it's really mostly for these other main characters like Ilaria or Anduin or Magni or whoever to really take center stage and be the focal point of the story in terms of the actual main characters. And it makes your player character a lot of the time just feel like a glorified cameraman. And I think if World of Warcraft is truly serious, which I think they are, in regards to this new era with the World Soul Saga and doubling down on in-game storytelling and really embracing that aspect of an RPG, I think they should revisit some ideas they've experimented with in the past but never really doubled down on, and that is the utilization of the main player character in terms of actually feeling like a main character throughout the entire story. In Final Fantasy XIV, you play as the Warrior of Light, and you are an important character, and you have your own dynamic and interactions with all the other important characters, especially the main cast of characters, the Scions of the Seventh Dawn. You feel like a member of that group, not just someone being brought along to fight some quest NPCs and then pretty much shut up whenever anything important's about to happen. And while you still are largely a silent character, you do have expressions, you have reactions, you do have moments in the game where you can pick some dialogue. Mostly it's just nothing too serious, but it's a nice bit of flavor. It's not like Final Fantasy XIV is branching stories or anything like that. It's just its limited uses of dialogue options provides a good sense of flavor and allows the Warrior of Light, your character, to feel like an actual character in these events. It may often be small when you're experiencing it in the moment, but I think over time it definitely adds up to create a cohesive and engaging experience. And I think something similar could happen when it comes to World of Warcraft. Now, granted, World of Warcraft is more so a gameplay-oriented experience, and I don't think it should shy away from that and just be a bunch of cutscenes shotgunned at the player time and time again. I rather like the pacing the War Within had in this regard. However, I do think they shouldn't shy away from having the main character, having your player character, engage with these other characters, give us a few dialogue options here and there, allow us to showcase something that even remotely resembles a personality in-game, and feel as if we're someone actually there and taking part in the experience and not just like I said before, a glorified killer of quest mobs who just shuts up whenever something important happens. I don't think it's mandatory for that to happen for World of Warcraft to have a good story, or to have good storytelling, but I do think it would help a lot. I think they're trying to do this, they just haven't gone full throttle with it yet. Sometimes after a big story moment happens, you can stay a while and listen to certain characters just talk about what's going on, interact with each other, or you might be able to pose a very rudimentary question like, how are you doing, stuff like that. It doesn't give your character flavor, it really allows the other characters to shine and give you an optional moment to expand on them as characters. It's nice. I would like to see some kind of back and forth, even if it's basic though. Because just asking, hey, how are you, that's not a personality, you know? I want my character to actually feel like a character, to feel like they have a personality, not just be a light switch to allow the other character to start yapping. And they've experimented with this in the past, but they never really went all out with it. Back in the days of Battle for Azeroth, if you were a Horde player, you had the choice to be a Sylvanas loyalist or not. It didn't really amount to much, but there were some moments that were different if you had sided with Sylvanas or with other people. You got a few extra scenes, dialogue was a little bit different here and there. It was nice. It wasn't substantial or much, and was absolutely 1000% underutilized in my opinion, but it was nice to have, and it added flavor experiencing that story as Horde. I don't think they should like necessarily do that again, but give the player the ability to choose to have some kind of personality for these scenes, to be able to like give our own 2 cents in some way. Even if the story itself doesn't fundamentally change, allow us to showcase some kind of personality during these events, and I think that would really help in terms of immersion. It is an RPG at the end of the day. I want to feel the role that I'm playing in this game. Now, Final Fantasy XIV has kind of moved away from this next point, but World of Warcraft has also dabbled in it previously, and I would like to see it revisit it. That is the idea of class and or race quests. Final Fantasy XIV used to, with each expansion, have a quest line for the job or the class that you played. And it was really cool. And some of these stories, especially the Dark Knight in Final Fantasy XIV, were particularly memorable. And honestly, some of my favorite questing just overall in that game. And yeah, there were some duds, but overall, I think the system was worthwhile. But the reasoning they gave in terms of why they stopped doing it was just that they had so many jobs at this point and were going to add more in the future, it just became too much work at the back end. And I'm sure that excuse can also be applied to World of Warcraft because there are a lot, especially if you want to break it down by spec, but I don't think they should. However, remember Legion? Legion had its issues, right? Legendary acquisition, artifact power grinding, absolutely. It had its issues. Good God, were order halls really cool though. For those who weren't there back in the day of Legion, for your class, you had your own little class hall, pretty much. And an entire quest line centered around your class. And there was quite a bit to it. It was one of the main hubs for the expansion for you, besides Dalaran. And it was excellent flair. It was just overall really welcomed and just, in my opinion, great. And I miss the days when World of Warcraft really embraced what class and or race you played. Mainly class, as a lot of the flavor of an RPG in that regard has been kind of culled from the game over the years. Final Fantasy XIV, while it doesn't do job quests anymore, really, what it does do are role quests. So for tank, healer, physical range, physical melee, stuff like that, it'll do a quest chain for those roles, so you still get some kind of flavor in that regard. They don't hit as hard for me as the class quest did, or the job quest, but I would like to see something in regards to that return for World of Warcraft. It's always cool when you're able to experience something that is unique for your character, like back in the day of Mr. Pandaria, having the Green Fire quest line for Warlocks, which was an entire quest line that you could undergo as a Warlock, and the main reward at the final quest, at the very end, after a big boss fight, your fire spell effects would be turned to green, like Fel, and it was awesome. It was a nice bit of flavor and something that made you feel good to be a Warlock. And people, myself included, rolled Warlock simply to be able to do them. Again, maybe class quests wouldn't be the play for World of Warcraft in the modern day, but I do think they should do something in regards to class flavor and class storytelling. Maybe you pair that up with what we were talking about before, in terms of giving the players some dialogue options here and there. Maybe you add a few of them them to be like class specific. Like maybe if you run upon a strange animal in a main quest line, if you play as hunter or druid, you can like bring in a couple of extra tidbits or maybe further the process a little bit. You know, stuff like that. Something that just makes you go, oh cool, I do feel like a warlock, or I do feel like a hunter, or I do feel like a paladin here. Stuff like that I do think, again, small in the moment, but over time, adds a bunch of flavor and adds a bunch of engagement and makes you go, I'm thankful I'm playing what I'm playing here right now. I think this would especially work for World of Warcraft because it is trying to follow in Final Fantasy XIV's footsteps in terms of really driving home and emphasizing the storytelling experience. So I think having ideas like this would really go a long way to just up the immersion. I'll still never forget back in the days of Final Fantasy XIV when I was first starting and I got to Heavensward as a Dragoon, I had a few extra dialogue options or just a bit of change in the story because I was a Dragoon, so I already knew a couple of these characters. It felt really good. Was it small and insignificant when I took a step back and looked at it all? Yes. But in the moment, it felt awesome. And it's moments like that that I think are severely undervalued in the modern day MMO. And it can feel like we break these games off into their own little subset genres and pretend that nothing else is important besides what it really focuses on. And when it comes to Final Fantasy XIV, that can be the story and the storytelling, and World of Warcraft can be the endgame experience and the gameplay. I think Final Fantasy XIV and World of Warcraft kind of operate on opposite ends of these spectrums, and both need to kind of meet each other in the middle. And when it comes to World of Warcraft, you don't have to make it a cutscene simulator that Final Fantasy XIV can feel like sometimes. You don't need to do that. You just need to add a few things here and there. And it's not like World of Warcraft hasn't done this stuff before. It's part of Classic. Class trainers, having quests to unlock your various demons as a warlock, stuff like that. I don't think that stuff should be shunned or abandoned. I think it should be reintroduced into World of Warcraft because it's flavor and it makes the game feel special and makes you feel special. And those moments are so important in my opinion. And it goes to another point that I want to talk about here. The World of Warcraft new play experience is crap. I'm not going to sugarcoat it. I'm not going to pretend that it's better than what it is. I think it's god-awful. And you may be going, Jmulls, there's no shot you're saying Final Fantasy XIV's new play experience is good. I don't think it's that bad. Again, opposite problem to World of Warcraft, where World of Warcraft tries to just get you to the end game as fast as humanly possible because that's where the game really shines. It tries to get you to the latest expansion and just says, go, go, go. Here's a bunch of XP. Here's a bunch of multipliers for XP rewards. Go, 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 go. You made it to the war within, okay, now let's take a step back and relax. Whereas for Final Fantasy XIV, it's like, okay, buddy, welcome to an MMORPG. You may be going, I want to play with my buddies and do the latest and greatest content. That's swell, buddy old champ. What you're gonna do, though, is you're gonna do like 700 hours of a JRPG story first, and you're gonna go through A Realm Reborn, Heavensward, Stormblood, Shadowbringers, Endwalker. Then you're gonna get the Dawntrail, and you're gonna do all the Dawntrail quests as well. And don't forget, each expansion has patch stories, and you're gonna be doing those as well. And sometimes there's gonna be a quest line that was optional, but we made it mandatory. So you're gonna do those as well. It can be a lot. And while I think Final Fantasy XIV should find a way to rein it in to some degree, it does do a good job of getting you introduced and immersed in the world of Final Fantasy XIV. It does a great job of that. By the time you get to endgame, you already have a bunch of characters you probably love and adore, you have a bunch of stories that you already have memorized, and the game over time was able to drip feed you the way the game works. And Final Fantasy XIV has been going back to alter some older dungeons and some of the older experience, namely in the combat side of things, to bring it more in line with modern gameplay design. Again, it's not perfect, but I think it does a far better job than World of Warcraft at introducing the player not only to the world, but how the game works and functions. I'm not saying what they should do is like, okay buddy, here's the deal. You're gonna play Classic, then you're gonna play the Burning Crusade, then Wrath of the Lich King, then Cataclysm, then Mists of Pandaria, then Warlords of Draenor, then Legion, then Battle for Azeroth, then Shadowlands, then Dragonflight. Now, we're in the sweetness, we're in the war within. Welcome to the game.
Father, is it over? At long last.
I'm not saying they should do that. But again, going back to that first point I made at the start of this video and I've made before, they should look at why it works in Final Fantasy XIV and why it may work in some of its other competitors that I personally haven't experienced that much, understand why it works in that environment, and find an analog, something that would work to the same way within the ecosystem of World of Warcraft. To me, I don't think that can be done with anything but a complete rework of the new player experience and essentially starting from zero. And if we want to go conspiratorial here, I kind of think they're building up to that after the World Soul Saga, which is like this current 3 expansion story arc they're doing in the first of 3 expansions. But like whatever the hell World of Warcraft has right now for its new play experience, I don't think is the play. If you're a new player, they force you to do like Exile's Reach, which is this island introductory zone that's supposed to give you the lay of the land and how the game works overall. And there's some cool moments in there, no doubt. I think the storytelling feels like I'm watching a kid's show. It's god-awful. The dialogue is so poorly written. It's just not good. There's a couple of like okay cutscenes, like the ship getting sunk by the giant wave, but like a lot of them just don't hit. They've been trying to reintroduce the characters from Exile's Reach and from that introductory experience when it comes to, say, the start of Dragonflight, or these are the characters that appeared during follower dungeons, which is kind of something they also took from Final Fantasy XIV that I kind of forgot about for the last video. Yeah, you know Trust Dungeons from Final Fantasy XIV? World of Warcraft kind of has that now with follower dungeons, and your party members there are the ones from Exile's Reach, which is kind of nice to see that crew brought back. But like when it comes to the main story, if you actually become invested with the story of Exile's Reach, which good on you if you do, these characters are never really that important afterwards. And if you get dropped into, say, Dragonflight, or let alone the War Within at some point, you're not interacting with any of these jabronis. You're like, who the hell is Anduin? Who the hell's Ilaria? What the heck's Magni? What even is a Thrall? You're like a fish out of water, and the introductory experience of an MMORPG, in my opinion, should be one that immediately grabs you and engages you with a section, a small little bite-sized part of the world, and it makes you immersed in that element, and then over time, it unravels and shows you more and more and more of the world, and that's when it really hooks you. I started back in the day with Cataclysm. Cataclysm was a complete revamp of the old world, of Kalimdor and the Eastern Kingdoms, and new introductory experiences for all the races were brought to the table. Sure, for a lot of older players that were used to the way classic WoW looked, and those older zones, and just immediately had a lot of that nostalgia is completely upended, I get that response, I absolutely do. But for me though, all of these introductory experiences got me hooked. And I do think they are great and they hold up, but the problem is, they're 15 years old. The story does not work anymore. The Night Elf starting zone doesn't even exist anymore in modern lore. It got burned down. The Night Elves live somewhere completely different now. And I think the bigger problem there was that the starting experiences in Cataclysm were so rooted in the story that was going on with Cataclysm that over time and over multiple expansions, it worked in Cataclysm and it worked when it was going to have you go through all these stories granularly. But now that so much time has passed, they're just no longer applicable. And leveling goes so quickly, you're just not going to experience a compelling story from beginning, middle to end until you get to the War Within. Because right now it's like, okay, go from 1 to 10 in your starting zone, then you're immediately gonna go to Dragonflight. Or, and this would be on another character besides your first character, because that character has to do Exile's Reach to begin with, and then just drops you in Dragonflight, which is better than what it used to be with BFA, but still not good in my opinion. What I'm getting at here is that World of Warcraft has the opposite problem of Final Fantasy XIV in this regard. Final Fantasy XIV has an amazing story, absolutely. Realm Reborn is kind of the weaker element of it though, and that's the start. But the strength of the way Final Fantasy XIV does it, at least, is that you will almost certainly become engaged with the world and the story going on. Should World of Warcraft go to that extreme? No. But again, I think there is a middle ground here, and I don't think WoW's at it right now, because the introductory new play experience for World of Warcraft is disjointed and just a mess. It's not going to engage people with the world, with the characters, with the races, with the factions, with the classes, or anything really like that. And I don't really think anything short of an entire rework of all the introductory experiences, and we make new updated ones that can apply for at least a few expansions, if not way longer, for all the different races, will work or be sufficient. I don't think Exile's Reach is the play. I know some people, especially veterans of World of Warcraft, may look at it and say, hey, this does a better job of showing people how to play the game and has some cool events. I think it does a crap job of making you care about the world. It tells, it doesn't show. The characters are absolute nothing, and it doesn't make you care about the Alliance or the Horde or what race you play or what class you play, really. Like, it may give you like an odd quest unique to your class, but like, dude, that's not enough in my opinion, like at all. And the reason I'm hopping on about this so much is because the new play experience is so important important if the goal is to grow this game and to expand it, and to continue it for years, if not another decade down the line. It's so important that the introductory experience is important because first impressions matter so much. And while Final Fantasy XIV's isn't perfect, it lets you pick a city-state, become accustomed to that place, introduces you later on to the other ones, expands the world, starts small, gets bigger, gives you class quests, gives you job quests, to make the decision you made on character selection feel important, and make the character you play as feel unique and different, and over time it makes you care about the world and the characters that you are experiencing that world with. That stuff for an RPG is so important in my opinion, and World of Warcraft should find a way to bring that idea back into WoW, because it used to have it, but it doesn't anymore, and I think that's a shame. And while WoW has gotten so much better in so many different ways, I think this has been one of its biggest issues for almost a decade at this point. There's also one other point I just want to make here, and that is in regards to stuff like Bosja for Final Fantasy XIV. World of Warcraft recently brought in a new island zone with the War Within. It was called the Siren Isle. It was brought in with 11.07. It's a small little island, some nice storytelling. I liked it quite a bit. There are very vocal people out there that don't like it though. And I think even within a patch or so, it's going to become pretty much obsolete outside of transmog farming and stuff like that. And I think that's a shame. But I do think Siren Isle has some rather interesting ideas with the storm mechanic and the way that it conveys storytelling through exploration and just taking your time to smell the roses and read some descriptions and all that. But none of these extra zones that World of Warcraft has really added. And I didn't play much of Shadowlands or Dragonflight, so I'm going to just like ignore those two examples. I don't really think there's an example there that would count at this point. But there hasn't been an extra zone added to a World of Warcraft expansion that has grabbed me and refused to let go, like Thunder Isle back in the days of Mists of Pandaria. I like Timeless Isle, I like it a lot, but I think Thunder Isle is more what I'm looking for here. Because the beautiful thing about Thunder Isle was that it evolved over time and was expanded on. You would unlock more and more locations as you further your way towards the Thunder Palace of Lei Shen. It was super cool. And one of the reasons I loved Bosja so much, and why a lot of people love Eureka, which is another type of content like that in Final Fantasy XIV, is because these zones and the story evolve over time. It's something that evolves over the course of the patch cycle for the expansion. You start off with one zone, but later on they might add an extra raid in there or something, or they might add another zone that continues the storyline there, and iterate on a lot of the gameplay mechanics. It's cool, and it's nice to have content that feels like it evolves over the course of the entire expansion life cycle. And I think if World of Warcraft wants to continue doing these extra zones, like Siren Isle, I think this is a better way to go about doing it. I think having them feel like a living, breathing environment can make them feel more everlasting and more memorable. I don't think this is something that is absolutely mandatory, because I've done a little bit of the PTR for Undermined, and it looks really good! But I would like to see them experiment with something like Thunder Isle again, or something more akin to, say, Bosja or even Eureka. Again, you don't bring them in one for one into World of Warcraft, you make some changes, but you take that idea of a zone that evolves over the course of the expansion's life cycle, add on to it, iterate on it. And now that I talk about it like that, they've kind of done that before with Suramar back in Legion, and it was rather well received by a lot of people, myself included. It was just a bit too time-gated. But like, that's easy to solve, just less than the time gating. I think it's something worth revisiting. Especially stuff like the 1v1 fights that you can trigger in things like Bosja, where you get randomly selected to do a 1v1 fight in front of everyone else in the zone. They can like stand around and watch, and if you win, everyone in the zone gets an extra like buff. It's a really cool idea, and I think that especially could work in World of Warcraft. It's kind of like the Brawlers Guild in that way, but you just introduce that element to the overworld, and I think that could work like a charm, especially if we do a zone like this. I don't know, those are just my 2 cents. With that, I think I'll call the video there for the day. Thank you all for tuning in. Again, neither of these games are perfect, but I do think they can learn from each other to grow and to be better. Because the ideal situation is that both of these games are absolutely awesome, and they work well, and that they are genuine competition for each other to strive to become better than each other over time. Because that means at the end of the day, we get better games to play. And that, to me, is something nice. Leave a comment down below with what else you think Final Fantasy XIV can teach World of Warcraft. What would you like to see implemented in some way? What idea do you think could be brought over? I'd love to hear your thoughts, hear your opinions, and to hear your perspectives. Stay safe, have a great day, and I'll see you all next time. Bye-bye, everybody. Until we meet again.